To millions of teenagers worldwide, they weren't just actors, they were a religion. Rob and Kristen, or Rob's 10, were the embodiment of a modern fairy tale. The brooding vampire and the devoted human girl, stepping off the pages of Stephenie Meyer's books into real life. They were a billion-dollar money-printing machine, the purest dream Hollywood ever manufactured. But that dream wasn't destroyed by a movie villain. It was crushed by a set of low-resolution photos taken in a car parked on a Los Angeles roadside. In a single afternoon, the Twilight princess traded her crown for the role the whole world loathed, the home wrecker. This wasn't just an affair. This was the day the magic of a generation shattered. Welcome to Society Noir. Today, we aren't talking about love. We're talking about betrayal, the value of million-dollar photos, and how an A-list star committed media suicide only to be reborn in a completely different form. To understand why this scandal was so seismic, we have to look at the landscape of 2012. At that time, the Twilight saga wasn't just a film. It was an economic entity. Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart were bound by contracts that required them not just to act well, but to live as their characters. The public craved truth. They wanted to believe the love between Bella and Edward was eternal, and Hollywood's PR machine gave them exactly that. Rob's 10 was a strictly protected brand. Their intentional, low-key, disheveled indie artists look only boosted their authenticity, making fans believe their feelings were real, not just of cameras. But look at Kristen Stewart. At 22, she had everything. Immense wealth, the attention of every prestigious director, and a boyfriend who was the most desired man on the planet. Yet, behind the cold red carpet exterior was a massive pressure. Kristen was never comfortable being the poster child for perfection. She was like a spring compressed tight under the weight of being a role model. In July 2012, that spring snapped in the most brutal way possible. Hollywood paparazzi operate like apex predators. They don't look for beauty. They look for the crack. And a photographer for Us Weekly hit the jackpot on July 17, 2012. Kristen Stewart left her house, but she wasn't going to see Robert. She drove her Mini Cooper to a deserted parking lot. There, she met Rupert Sanders, the director of Snow White and the Huntsman, the film she had just starred in. Crucial context. Rupert was 41 at the time, married to model Liberty Ross, and had 2 young children. These photos didn't just capture a kiss. They captured the collapse of a value system. Analyze the body language in those frames. It's reckless, clandestine, and almost naively unguarded for an A-list star. They stood in public with no bodyguards, no cover. Why would someone as lens-sensitive as Kristen be so careless? Did she want to be caught? Or did the pressure of being the good girl cause her to lose her basic defensive instincts? The paparazzi that day didn't just make money. They held a nuclear weapon that could wipe out the careers of both people in the frame. When Us Weekly contacted Kristen's reps a few days later to announce the story, her entire PR empire went into DEFCON 1. On the morning of July 24th, the world woke up to see Snow White embracing her married director all over newsstands. The public reaction wasn't just surprise, it was collective rage. The internet in 2012 didn't have cancel culture as we know it today, but what Kristen endured was its precursor. She was branded with a venomous nickname, Trampire, a cruel play on tramp and vampire. Why was the public harsher on her than Rupert Sanders? After all, he was a married man with children, the one with the greater marital commitment. The answer lies in classic Hollywood sexism. A man having an affair is a mistake. But a woman betraying the dream prince of millions of girls is an unforgivable crime. Robert Pattinson, in the eyes of the public, suddenly became the most pitiable victim in the world. This created immense pressure on Lionsgate. They still had Breaking Dawn, Part 2 set for release later that year. How do you sell a movie about eternal love when the lead actress just admitted to being an adulteress in front of the whole world? Usually, in these scandals, stars stay quiet and hire a crisis firm to release vague statements about privacy. But Kristen Stewart, guided by her PR team or perhaps her own panicked instincts, did the unthinkable. Less than 24 hours after the photos leaked, she issued an official statement. It wasn't a dry legal text. It was an emotional, almost desperate confession. I am deeply sorry for the hurt and embarrassment I've caused those close to me and everyone this has affected. This momentary indiscretion has jeopardized the most important thing in my life. The person I love and respect the most, Rob. I love him, I'm so sorry. Media experts were shocked. Why admit it immediately? Why beg for Rob's forgiveness so publicly? From a Society Noir perspective, this was a suicide to rebirth move. By immediately painting herself as a sinner, Kristen stripped the tabloids of their discovery power. You can't expose someone who has already stripped themselves bare. She transformed herself from a cunning deceiver into a young girl who made a mistake and was suffering for love, but the price was astronomical. She became the center of all mockery. Even Donald Trump jumped in with tweets advising Robert Pattinson not to take her back. The world was watching Kristen Stewart as if she were a social experiment in public shaming. But was this the end? Or was it actually the beginning of the greatest escape plan in Hollywood history? In the next part, we go deep into the cleansing. How Kristen Stewart walked away from a $100 million spotlight to dive into gritty indie films. How she confronted the media with cold silence. And her journey to becoming a Chanel fashion icon. How do you go from homewrecker to the first American actress to win France's prestigious César Award? Don't blink, because the real game has only just begun to be why 2012, the Twilight phenomenon had reached a state of terminal velocity. For the global audience, the line between fiction and reality had been surgically removed. Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson weren't just actors. They were the biological manifestations of a $3 billion fantasy. The studio, Lionsgate, didn't just manage their careers. They managed their chemistry with dictatorial precision. Every public appearance, every stolen glance captured by paparazzi was a calculated transaction. To the fans, it was Rob's 10, a love story for the ages. To the board directors, it was an insurance policy against declining box office numbers. But when you live your life inside a silver-lined cage, the oxygen starts to run thin. Kristen, the ultimate IT girl of the late 2000s, was suffocating under the weight of a brand she never asked to own. Imagine being 22 years old, possessing enough wealth to buy a small country, but not having the freedom to choose your own partner without crashing the stock market of teen emotions. This wasn't a romance. It was a high-stakes psychological siege. Enter Rupert Sanders, a 41-year-old director with a penchant for visual flair and a total disregard for the structural integrity of his own marriage. He was hired to direct Snow White and Huntsman, a film meant to transform Kristen from a passive vampire bride into a warrior queen. But Hollywood sets are notorious breeding grounds for a specific kind of chemical chaos. Sanders didn't see Kristen as a young woman struggling with the crushing pressure of fame. He saw a muse, or perhaps more accurately, he saw a shortcut to relevance. For Kristen, Sanders represented an exit, a brutal, reckless departure from the Rob's 10 script that had become her psychological prison. The affair wasn't just a betrayal of a boyfriend. It was a hostile takeover of a corporate image. It was a moment the Golden Girl decided to set her own pedestal on fire just to see if the world would watch it burn. And oh, how they watched. On July 17th, 2012, the facade didn't just crack. It disintegrated on the cold pavement of a Los Angeles parking lot. The paparazzi photos weren't just blurry snapshots. They were a forensic autopsy of a career in real time. Kristen and Rupert, caught in a series of intimate moments that looked less like a passionate affair and more like a desperate, clumsy cry for help. When U.S. Weekly hit the stands, the industry didn't just react. It went into a state of total moral panic. The Twilight fan base, a collective consciousness fueled by Team Edward loyalty, felt a personal, visceral betrayal. But look closer at the elite's reaction. The studio didn't care about the broken hearts. They cared about the Breaking Dawn Part 2 press tour. Kristen was immediately branded with a label that would follow her for a decade, the Trampire. It was a masterpiece of slut-shaming, a calculated effort by the PR machines to protect their male assets, Pattinson and Sanders, while leaving the expendable female lead to face the wolves alone. The aftermath was a masterclass in systemic destruction. Kristen issued an apology that read like a hostage note, written in the frantic, suffocating language of someone trying to save a sinking ship. I love him. I'm so sorry," she pleaded. But in Society Noir, an apology isn't a bridge to forgiveness. It's a confession that authorizes the execution. Robert Pattinson played the role of the jilted lover, with heartbreaking accuracy, moving out of their shared mansion while the world cheered for his dignity. Meanwhile, Rupert Sanders' wife, Liberty Ross, who ironically played Kristen's mother in the film, became the silent, elegant victim of this aristocratic car crash. The industry's shadow cabinet began to move. Contracts were reviewed. Invitations to elite bacchanals were quietly rescinded. Kristen Stewart, the girl who had everything, found herself in a permanent biological retirement from the world of relatable stardom. She had committed the ultimate sin of the elite. She had been caught being human in an industry that only pays for perfection. As she sat in the wreckage of her $200 million reputation, the vultures weren't just circling, they were landing. The flight of glamour was over. The free fall had begun. After the artificial smoke of the Twilight finale cleared, Kristen Stewart didn't just walk away from a franchise. She walked into a professional void. The machine had used her to protect its $800 million asset, and then it promptly stopped calling. For a year, the silence was deafening. But this is where the story shifts from a tragic downfall to a calculated, high-stakes psychological rebranding. Kristen realized a fundamental truth about the Hollywood elite. If you can't be their America's sweetheart, you must become their critical darling. She turned her back on the blockbuster industrial complex. No more capes, no more vampires, and certainly no more studio-mandated romances. She fled to Europe, seeking refuge in the arms of independent cinema, the only place where a tainted reputation is seen as artistic depth. Her collaboration with French director Olivier Assayas in Clouds of Sils Maria was a strategic masterstroke. By playing the assistant to an aging star, she effectively mirrored her own reality, a woman overshadowed by the very industry that demands her youth. When she became the first American actress to win a César Award, it wasn't just a trophy. It was a formal middle finger to the tabloid editors who had predicted her permanent biological retirement from the A-list. While the public was busy debating her personal life, the luxury fashion world saw a different kind of value in Kristen's broken image. Karl Lagerfeld, the late dictator Chanel, didn't want a perfect girl next door. He wanted a rebel. He wanted someone whose very presence suggested a hostile psychological takeover of traditional beauty standards. Kristen's long-standing contract with Chanel is a lesson in power dynamics. She stopped trying to look like a movie star and started looking like a piece of high-fashion propaganda. She chopped her hair, embraced a gender-fluid aesthetic, and began dating women. In doing so, she rendered the old Robston narrative completely obsolete. You cannot shame someone for a past infidelity when they have completely redefined their identity beyond the reach of your conservative morals. This wasn't just a lifestyle choice. It was a protective armor. By becoming an alternative icon, she escaped the scrutiny of the mass-market audience. She moved from the mainstream cage to the couture fortress, where the rules of public scandal are rewritten by the elite few. As we look back at the wreckage of the 2012 scandal, we must perform a forensic autopsy on the winners and losers. Robert Pattinson, the jilted lover, used the public sympathy to pivot into dark, gritty roles, eventually reclaiming the crown as Batman. He played the victim perfectly until he no longer needed the pity. Rupert Sanders, the director who treated his family like disposable props, remains a footnote in history, a cautionary tale how the machine protects its men with silence while letting its women burn in the spotlight. Liberty Ross, the betrayed wife, walked away with a massive settlement and a new life, proving that sometimes the only way to win in Society Noir is to exit the game entirely. And then there's Kristen. She survived the most intense public shaming of the digital age not by apologizing, but by refusing to be defined by the Trampire headline. She learned that in Hollywood, your soul is just a brand, and brands can be rebranded with enough grit and a good stylist. The story of Kristen Stewart and the Twilight scandal is a brutal joke where the punchline was our own obsession. We watched her downfall as if it were a reality show, oblivious to the fact that we were the ones funding the cameras. The industry built a goddess, tore her down for entertainment, and then sold us the tickets to her comeback. In the end, Power doesn't care about your morals, your heartbreak, or your forever. It only cares about the transaction. Kristen Stewart didn't find redemption in the traditional sense. She simply found a way to become a more expensive product that the elite couldn't afford to ignore. From the chemical chaos of a Mini Cooper to the sterile prestige of the Oscars, this has been a breakdown of how the machine dismantles and rebuilds its icons. Remember, in the world of the elite, the only thing more profitable than a star is a beautiful, tragic ruin. Welcome to the end of the show.